Hi, and welcome to the History Hut. I'm Jim, this is Dr. K, and Doctor, we'll be talking about barbarians on the move today. I don't know if that's what you wanted to talk about, but that's what I'm saying we're talking about.
Oh, okay.
Let's take a look at Europe from the collapse of the Roman Empire. What were the main themes there?
Oh, well, there's lots of themes, and the first thing we should probably talk about is who are these barbarians?
Who are they?
Yeah, there's tons of them. You're probably thinking, I remember Attila the Hun, but you probably don't think of very many other ones. But there's a whole list of them. People on the move. There's the Huns. There's the Goths. There's the Ostrogoths. There's the Visigoths. Goths everywhere.
There's super Visigoths.
Yeah. There's the Vandals, the Alemanni, the Burgundians, the Franks, the Lombards, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Thuringians, the...
Are you just making them up now?
Yeah. The Alans.
Alans.
Yeah, just like make up a bunch of guys' names. The Normans later on. Yeah, they're all over the place. And until fairly recently, we just called them barbarians, and that actually came from, we got that from the Greek, because the Greeks just called anybody that couldn't speak Greek a barbarian. Just, you know, it's kind of mean. And any language that sounded to them like barbar. Remember, we've had this thing with language before, Sut for the Kama Sutra,
yeah.
so now it's barbar. So anybody that didn't speak Greek or any language that sounded really different,
Kind of the whole
refer to them as barbarians.
The whole civilization thing over again, right?
That exactly. That's exactly the point.
I'm
right.
learning stuff.
So yeah, that's good. So yeah, the big theme is that it's a time when you have this intense movement of fairly organized people inside and outside the Roman Empire. And some of them are the famous ones, obviously, like the Huns. We talked about the Huns before, the Hunas, or the White Huns, or the Hephthalites. Remember, one branch went down the Oxus and off to India, and the other branch pushed west. So I think probably one of the things that starts off this whole massive movement of people is that the Huns come out of their homeland and everybody is shoved in front of them. So people that wouldn't have been anywhere close to the Roman Empire, wouldn't have been near it at all, suddenly the Huns are coming towards them and they're like, oh crap, and they start moving further and further west. And as they move west, they of course push up against other people who are also considered to be barbarians, and they're like, oh, you're scary, and they move west. And so you've got like all these kind of different groups all moving west until eventually they kind of bang up against the Roman Empire. And so of course this has implications for the Romans. So they bang up against the Roman Empire, and there are a couple of things that happen. And it's not just all fighting. The Romans actually make deals with lots of them, and they come in, and they call them federati. They come in as troops, and then they help the Romans against other people who are outside the borders. Some of them settle inside the borders of Rome. Some are within the Roman Empire for a really long time. But I think it's this last push when the Huns kind of are on the move that almost changes everything. But I think the main thing is that although we think of this period, because this is the era we're going to be covering, as the Dark Ages, kind of 400 to 800 AD. I think of it as the Dark Ages in the sense that nothing's happening. So, and that's totally not true at all. There's this incredible movement of people, and of course those people are learning things. They're adapting to all these changed circumstances as they start to move inside the walls of the Roman Empire.
So what about the Roman Empire?
Well, I mean, the Roman Empire takes a few hundred years to collapse. It's not over in a day by any means, although it's under some fairly strong attacks right from the late 300s and certainly into the early 400s. The Roman Empire, absolutely massive. It has over 100 million people in it in the period that we're talking about. And of course, if you were to study classics, you'd learn all about the Roman Empire. But we're not studying classics.
No, we're not.
That's like early history. So we're just studying the later stuff. But it does cover, the Roman Empire covers all of Europe, the bottom of the British Isles, not Scotland, where I'm from and you're from, and that's because we were the only group in the entire universe just about that were able to hold the Romans off.
Huh.
something that we're quite proud of. Everybody else in continental Europe and in Britain are always like, oh, you know, it's great, the legacy of the Roman Empire. We've got, you know, Roman law, and we've got Christianity, and you know, we've got jurisprudence, we've got all this other stuff, and we, the Scots, are like, we didn't take any of that stuff. We told them to get stuff. So we're quite proud that we didn't get any of the great legacy that everybody else shares when they're taking classics courses. They're like, oh, it's great to have been part of the Roman Empire. We're like, I don't think so.
Except for the part where they like overthrew your civilization.
Well, yeah,
exactly. That part was a bit rough.
That's always awkward.
Bit rough.
Think of the Mongols, you know, the initial bit where you're all killed. Yeah, that's the tough part. Afterwards, you get the legacy. Who really needs heated floors?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I don't even have that now, and I, like you, live in the modern
severe climate of northern Canada.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, give it all away. So, so anyway, and it's pretty cold here in the History Hut tonight because there's snow outside, and I know it's not even insulated, and there's a big storm on the horizon. So we're
from the north,
forward to that. It's coming from the north. I expected it. I've already written a poem about it, a haiku about snow. Maybe I'll share that later.
Our usual viewers will get that joke.
Of course they will. Of course they will. And if you haven't been a usual viewer, then get back through them and watch them all, and then you'll understand. So anyway, it covers all of Europe and the British Isles, but not Scotland. In fact, Emperor Hadrian comes to the British Isles about 122 AD and realizes that it's just too difficult to deal with these crazy people way up in the north, and so they just build this huge wall, and the place that they build it is in kind of northern England, and it's 73 miles from one side to the other, and they just do that to kind of keep the people that we will affectionately refer to as the Scots out. And so that's the kind of the end of the Roman Empire. So we're beyond the edge of empire. And there's a wee joke about that, you know, Roman legion, after Roman legion goes over the wall and nobody ever comes back, people are like, oh man, what's going on? Those people, they must be so fierce, they're just terrible. And eventually this one Roman soldier staggers back and they say, what happened? Like, what's going on over there? And he says, oh, it's an ambush, there was two of them. The great Scottish warrior tradition. So anyway, the British Isles, but not Scotland.
Will that be on the exam?
No, but if you come to Scottish history classes, you'll learn that too. They hold North Africa, and they hold parts of the Middle East as well. And the Middle East, the part of the Middle East that they hold, comes under pressure from the Sassanid Empire, kind of in the area around Iran. And the rest of the empire is hit by really this stream of barbarians coming both from the east, running from the Huns, and then also from the north. So by the time you get to the end of the 4th century, that the empire is under an incredible amount of pressure, and of course it does have internal problems, governing problems with the economy as well. But as I was saying before, the barbarians that are pushed up against its eastern border are then invited in to help guard it. So the Romans are like, well, come in, and if you could just turn around and face the way you came from and stop any other people from coming in, that would be great. And so that's exactly what happens at the beginning. But then there's some provocation from the Roman side. You know, they promise things that they don't deliver on, and then they try and tax these guys. You know, never tax a barbarian. It doesn't go well at all. So after some provocation from Rome, these groups start to turn and actually attack the empire. And not all Roman leaders or Roman citizens had been happy with this policy of bringing, you know, barbarians inside the empire and then arming them and having them protect it. One senator said, it is a little quote that I quite like, "It is folly to use wolves as watchdogs." So they're like, why would you do that? Why would you give these guys?
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, you know, some of the barbarian groups, and of course I should point out that we seldom refer to them as barbarians anymore. These days, you know, with all the revisions that go on in history, these days we sometimes, they're referred to just as, if they're from the north, Germanic people, but if they're not, we call them folk wanderers, which makes them sound like they have a guitar and they're kind of strolling through Europe enjoying,
like they
you know,
wandered
a nice
to
evening
Woodstock.
Out. Yeah, exactly. So maybe that's not quite so good, but you know, an attempt to get away from this, you know, this idea that they're barbaric, because it's not always true. So some of the barbarians who had come in, or the folk wanderers had come in, obtained high rank. within the empire, so they actually work within the empire. The Franks, for example, the Salian Franks, they're allowed to settle on the lower Rhine, and their leader, Childeric, who is the father of Clovis, the Merovingian king, and we're going to be talking about these guys in a while. Childeric called himself Rex for king, but he also held the Roman rank of magister, which is general. So he had a Roman rank, and he was also the leader of his own people. And, you know, we're, as I've said before, we're not here to talk about the glories of Rome, although, to be fair to them, there are, you know, many. They, you know, huge agricultural estates called latifunda. They had a massive trade zone with no tolls. So think about the Islamic Empire, remember we talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
Paved roads, they had concrete, they used vaulting techniques for their buildings. All you have to do is go to Rome to see the Colosseum, what remains of the Colosseum. Absolutely fantastic, quarter of a mile in circumference. They're famous for building incredibly straight roads, and many of them are to be found through the British Isles all the way up to Hadrian's Wall. Then after that, no roads at all for the Scots until the 1740s, when the English wanted to build roads through it so they could stop any rebellions after that. So the Romans famous for their bridges and for their aqueducts, and the aqueducts, stone aqueducts, they could bring in fresh water from miles away. In fact, there are 14 aqueducts over about a 265-mile stretch that brought water to Rome daily. I remember we were talking about the people of the Americas, the Aztec, and the clean water being brought in. So lots of things like that. People were quite impressed because they had free medical services for their soldiers, hydrotherapy, and again, the heated floor, the heated floor in your house. But, you know, they have all these wonderful things, and of course, everyone but the Scots are happy to think of the great legacy of Rome. But we're really here to talk about the state of Europe after the collapse of Rome, or as it's kind of happening, and to discuss the fate of these barbarians who are on the move, or, you know, we could call it kind of life in the Dark Ages. And there are, before I kind of talk about the Dark Ages, there are some really good books that you should take note of. And one is called The Inheritance of Rome by Chris Wickham. And it's called Illuminating the Dark Ages, 400 to 1000. It's a really good book. This one's
about 1,000 pages.
This one's much shorter and really super interesting to read. Barbarians to Angels, The Dark Ages Reconsidered, Peter Wells. And it's a short book, but absolutely fascinating, and some, you know, the kind of latest stuff on what was going on in the Dark Ages. And then if you like the kind of jollier look at the past from people involved with things like Monty Python, Terry Jones's book, well, it's actually Terry Jones and Alan Herrera, and it's called Barbarians, An Alternative Roman History. And on the front it says, I wish all historical books written by non-historians were so informed, and all books by historians were so well written. What a bitch slap. So, so there, a fresh approach to Roman history. It reveals that most of those written off by Rome as uncivilized, savage, and barbaric were in fact organized, motivated, and intelligent people with no intention of overthrowing Rome and plundering the empire. So very, very interesting. And I think there's a DVD set that you can get from like Amazon that goes along with this, but really cool.
More product placement.
Yeah.
Go on.
And a book by Christopher Kelly called Attila the Hun, Barbarian Terror and the Fall of the Roman Empire. So lots of really good stuff, and a lot of new material on the Dark Ages, and you know, whether we can actually call it the Dark Ages anymore, or if we should just give that up.
I'm hearing in my headset that this shouldn't take long, this next question, but this isn't my first episode, but let's discuss the Dark Ages.
Well, the first point about the Dark Ages is that you don't have to wait until the 800s and Charlemagne to find some great achievements or to see steps being taken in things that we just don't associate with the Dark Ages at all, things like education and learning. It's all going down in the Dark Ages. Everything's happening then. And it's just a complete, you know, it's completely misnamed. It's just terrible. So If you were to look at this period after 400, you see things like new traditions in decorative metalwork. They're using bronze and gold and iron and silver. You can see it in lots of the chalice work in places like Ireland, the Ardagh chalice in particular. You can see beautifully worked helmets for warriors with lots of animal carvings on them from the 3rd century AD. And of course the famous, and usually from about the 600s on, the illuminated manuscripts, absolutely unbelievably beautiful with, you know, jewel encrusted covers, just incredible artwork inside. So all this stuff's going on. In architecture, a lot of the excavations, buildings between 400 and 800 include monasteries, but fabulous buildings. Maybe, of course, not sophisticated as the ones that you would see in Rome, and even when you get to places like Aachen and Charlemagne. It's a, you know, some of the buildings there are kind of a sad excuse for really cool buildings that you'd find in the Roman Empire, but it's, you know, there are things going on. We know that writing had never completely disappeared. It continued on in the monastic centers and the scriptoria, they're called. Ireland, of course, led the way in the 5th century as a center for scholars, but you also have places in England like Jarrow, where the Venerable Bede, who's an Anglo-Saxon born in the late 600s, he joined the monastery at Jarrow because it had a 500-volume library, and he was really interested in all those kinds of things that come in books, you know. So then he went on to write the Ecclesiastical History of England, just really quite famous. The work of another Anglo-Saxon, Alcuin of York. That's a strange spelling, Alcuin, Alcuin of York. He helps, of course, establish what we will call the Carolingian Renaissance under Charlemagne. So this Dark Ages, this period from at least 400 to 800, isn't so dark after all. If you looked at any of the governments that these different barbarian groups were trying to establish or trying to run, you'd find that they had people at their court, people at their center who could write, and of course that's why monks become so valuable. Kings didn't necessarily read or write, but they would dictate to copyists. You have places like Sevilla or Seville. The Bishop of Seville had a large library in Seville. You have people, interestingly enough, you know, we don't think about people moving around because with the fall of the Roman Empire, the roads fall into disrepair and nothing's protected, and it becomes a kind of scary time. But people are actually still moving around quite a bit. They're still going on pilgrimages, and we know that the Lombards, one of the groups kind of close to Rome, the Lombards issued passports for visitors coming through their territory and heading for Rome. So people are on the move. You have Christian missionaries covering Europe like moss on a stone. I mean, there are Irish monks absolutely everywhere. You can't, you know, move to, but you trip over one. And you see them setting up Christian processions and using relics and miracles to try and get people to turn away from the dark side, turn away from their pagan belief system, and turn towards Christianity. And of course, this Dark Ages is also this period of intense migration. So you have, in Eastern Europe, you have groups like the Slavs and the Avars and the Alans and the Goths. It's funny, one's called Alans. The Alans and the Goths and the Gepids and the Huns and the Ostrogoths. And in Britain, you have the Irish. Some of them, they're called the Scotti, actually. Scots, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. And in Western Europe, you have the Alemanni. That's, of course, a word for German, right? Alemanni. The Alemanni, the Angles and the Saxons are kind of up in the north, kind of Denmark territory. The Burgundians, the Franks, the Frisians, the Thuringians, the Visigoths again, and another little group called the Vandals. So it's really hard to say how many people, remember we talked about this when we talked about the peopling of the Americas, it's very difficult to say if people are moving around in huge numbers or if they're just moving around in small groups. And of course, they're not keeping their own records, and it's always in the best interests of the Romans to make out there are more of them, because, you know, if you have to put them down, you have to attack them, it's better that you're attacking huge numbers of people. Some of them come into contact with the Roman Empire quite gradually. Some might not even have been aware at all that the Roman Empire existed until they're kind of, you know, shoved up against it. But thanks to archaeologists, we know what, you know, the material things. We know what these people wore, We know how they fought, and we have a kind of timeline of their movements. And archaeologists tell us that there is no material evidence for large-scale movements at all. There are no new house types. There are no new burial practices, so it's likely that it was small groups of elite warriors with their followers that come at first, and then later on, you know, you have families following and settling. So again, you know, small groups of people, not really aware of where they are or where they're going, but just being kind of shoved about by the movement of that one group on the one side, the Huns, and everybody moves in front of them.
Very interesting stuff.
Cool.
So that does it for part 1 of Barbarians on the Move.
That's right.
Join us for part 2.